Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be going through part 2 of the first tier of the missing persons iceberg. If you missed part 1 of this video, I'll have it linked in the description, but you don't need to watch these in any particular order. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, we're currently at the tip of the iceberg, which contains a set of missing persons cases that have been widely reported on in the media and are well known to much of the public. In the future videos of this series, we'll work down the iceberg, with each tier featuring a set of stranger and more obscure stories of the missing. But before we begin, I just want to give out a quick warning for this video, as it contains content some may find disturbing. If you're sensitive to this kind of subject matter, feel free to click off this video. But without further ado, let's begin. On March 24th, 1998, 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley vanished aboard a cruise ship in the Caribbean Sea. She was joined by her mother, father, and younger brother on the week-long trip. And on their third night at sea, Amy and her brother Brad decided to go dancing at the ship's disco and got back to their cabin around 3:30 a.m. For the next 2 hours, the siblings rested in their suite, with Amy asleep in a lounge chair on the balcony. Amy's father woke briefly at around 5:30 a.m., and after seeing that both of his children were back safe, he went back to sleep. However, when he woke up again about 30 minutes later, Amy was gone. The only items of hers not in the room or on the balcony were her cigarettes and lighter, leading him to believe that she had gone somewhere on the deck to smoke. Witnesses seemed to corroborate this, as a woman matching Amy's description was seen around 6 a.m. that morning, riding the elevator to the top deck of the ship. But after searching the ship for half an hour without finding any sign of Amy, her father began to get worried, and he woke up the rest of his family to tell them that Amy was gone. The Bradleys searched the ship up and down, but after finding nothing, they went to the crew to ask for help. Just as they did this, the ship was preparing to dock at the Dutch Caribbean island of Curaçao. The Bradleys made it clear that they wanted swift action taken in the search for Amy, first asking for an announcement that there was a missing woman on board, and second, that they would not let a single person off board until they located Amy. Unfortunately, the ship declined both of these requests, saying that it was too early to do anything so drastic. Despite the family's pleas, the ship let down the gangplanks as scheduled and allowed thousands of passengers to flood the island of Curaçao. It would take until noontime for the ship's crew to organize a search effort on the ship, but they found no sign of Amy. Content that she wasn't on the ship, the Bradleys went into Curaçao, but after hours of searching, they also came up empty-handed. Their last hope that this had all been a misunderstanding came when it was time to leave the island and reboard the ship. But as expected, Amy was nowhere to be found in their suite or on the rest of the ship. The Bradley family decided to stay on Curaçao instead of reboarding the ship, and reported Amy missing to the authorities on the island. Beginning on the day of her disappearance, Dutch officials conducted a 4-day-long search, and the crew reportedly searched the ship for 6 days, but found no sign of Amy. One of the first theories put forth by investigators was that Amy had fallen overboard. However, the Bradleys say that Amy was a strong swimmer and had previously worked as a lifeguard, and since the ship was so close to the shore at the time of her disappearance, they believe she would have been able to make her way back safely. There was also concern that Amy had willingly jumped ship, but her family and friends said that she was not depressed, and that she had recently moved into a new apartment and had adopted a dog. Her family maintained that she was excited about her future, and that there was absolutely no chance that she had taken her own life. The Bradleys did not believe either of these outcomes were probable. Instead, they were confident that Amy had either been abducted from the cruise or that she had been a victim of foul play, and had possibly been thrown overboard. Several strange occurrences helped form this theory, one of which involved a formal dinner Amy attended on the ship. That night, Amy's mother recalled many people watching her daughter admiringly, and said that a waiter had passed Amy a note inviting her to go drinking with him on shore once they reached Curaçao. A photographer at this event took several photos of Amy for her to purchase later, but when he went to find them after her disappearance, he found that only her pictures had been stolen. This led some to believe that Amy could have been targeted, either by human traffickers or simply an individual wanting to harm her. Another strange facet of this case involves a member of the ship's band named Alistair Douglas, also known as Yellow, who was seen dancing with Amy on the night before she disappeared. Allegedly, Alistair Douglas approached Amy's brother the next morning and said that he was sorry to hear about his sister. However, at this point, the Bradleys hadn't spoken to any of the ship's crew, and the only people that should have known Amy was missing were her 3 family members. But as far as we know, Douglas has not been named a suspect in her disappearance. There have been several reported sightings of Amy, none of which, as far as I know, have been confirmed. In August of 1998, about 5 months after her disappearance, a man vacationing in Curacao said that he saw Amy Lynn Bradley walking on the beach with 2 men and said that she seemed as though she was trying to get his attention. Based on her appearance and her visible tattoos, the man says he is positive the woman was Amy. In March of 2005, a woman named Judy Marr said that while she was on vacation in Barbados, she saw a woman in a department store restroom that appeared visibly shaken. After approaching her, the woman reportedly said that her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia. I should mention here that Amy was in fact from Virginia. Shortly after this, 3 men burst into the restroom and took the woman away. On screen now are the composite sketches of the woman and men in question. There have been several other sightings of women resembling Amy, but one in particular, which has received much attention on the internet, concerns a woman allegedly being trafficked on a Caribbean website. The woman on the screen, identified as Jazz, is believed by many to be Amy Lynn Bradley. However, as far as we know, investigation into this website has not yielded any results in the search for Amy. Despite extensive media attention on this case and an ongoing investigation, Amy Lynn Bradley's whereabouts remain unknown. Her family is still hopeful that they'll someday have answers, but for now, her case remains unsolved. Shelly Miscavige, wife of David Miscavige, the leader of the Church of Scientology, has not been seen in public since she attended her father's funeral in August of 2007. Reports of her disappearance first gained traction in the media in 2013, when former Scientologist Leah Remini filed a missing persons report for Shelly. However, the investigation was halted after officers said they were able to locate Shelly and confirm that she was safe. This seemed to confirm what was said by Shelly's husband and his attorneys, that Shelly was not missing, but simply wanted a private life dedicated to the work of the church. But this conclusion was suspicious to many, as to this day, there has not been a confirmed sighting of Shelly Miscavige in public. Many suspected that her husband had a hand in Shelly's disappearance, and this was not the first time he had been suspected of such a crime. In 1985, Shelly's mother, Flo Barnett, was found dead, having been shot 4 times in the chest and head, but despite this, her death was ruled a suicide. Flo had been a longtime member of the Church of Scientology, but not long before her death, she had resigned from her job at the church and started working at an independent Scientology organization not accepted by the mainstream church. At her departure, she allegedly brought with her confidential materials related to the church, although I couldn't find any specifics regarding what they were. This led some to believe that David would have had a motive to harm his mother-in-law to keep these documents under wraps, but it does not appear that there was any evidence to support this, and I couldn't find any reports of him being investigated in the matter. A former Scientologist named Steve Hall told Business Insider that he believes Shelly is at Scientology's Church of Spiritual Technology, a remote forest compound with prison-like security in Twin Peaks, California. Interestingly enough, the compound has spikes on its outermost fence that face into the compound rather than out. I couldn't find a clear consensus on exactly why Shelly is believed to be held at this compound, either voluntarily or against her will. Despite all of this, the Church of Scientology and David Miscavige still assert that Shelly's absence is a personal choice and that they have done nothing to harm her. 6-year-old Morgan Nick went missing on June 9, 1995, at a Little League baseball game in Alma, Arkansas. During the game, at around 10:30 p.m., Morgan asked her mother if she could go catch fireflies with 2 of her friends near the parking lot. Her mother hesitated, but ended up letting her go, since she would be close by and within eyeshot. About 15 minutes later, the 2 children returned to the game without Morgan, telling her mother that they had stopped at Morgan's car to empty sand out of their shoes before walking back. And since Morgan hadn't followed them, they figured that she was just going to wait for her mother by the car since the game was over. But when she went to look for Morgan, she found that her daughter had vanished without a trace. Soon after this, the police were called and Morgan was reported missing. In talking with the 2 children that were with Morgan that night, they said that there had been a man leaning against a red Ford pickup truck that had talked to them at one point, but that they didn't remember what the man had said. This unidentified man immediately became the prime suspect in Morgan's assumed abduction, since his car was seen leaving the parking lot during the window of time in which Morgan disappeared. Despite this lead, police were unable to identify the man in the red truck, and despite heavy media coverage of the case, the disappearance of Morgan Nick began to go cold. In 2021, police named Billy Jack Links as a person of interest in Morgan's abduction. Links had died in prison in the year 2000 while serving a sentence for the attempted abduction of a child only 2 months after Morgan disappeared, and only miles from where Morgan was abducted. Inside of Links' red pickup truck, police found trace amounts of blood that were unable to be DNA tested. They also found a fiber of clothing closely resembling the shirt Morgan was wearing when she went missing. Unfortunately, despite this evidence, Morgan Nick's disappearance is still considered unsolved, and her family has still not been given closure or any definitive answers. On Saturday, October 22, 2005, 30-year-old Tara Grinstead attended a beauty pageant and barbecue in Ocilla, Georgia. Tara herself had been an active participant in pageants as a young adult and enjoyed mentoring the young women in her community. Sometime around 11 p.m., she drove back to her home where she lived alone. The next morning, she didn't attend church, which was unusual behavior for her. The next day, on Monday the 24th, Tara didn't show up at Irwin County High School where she worked as a high school history teacher and cheer coach. Her coworkers called the police to check on her, and officers were sent to her home, where they found her unlocked car sitting outside, with its tires covered in clay. The car's seat was also found to be adjusted for someone taller than Tara. While her cell phone and the clothes she was last seen wearing were inside the house, her purse and keys were missing. On Tara's front lawn, investigators found a single latex glove. When sent to forensic scientists, they found the glove contained the DNA of Tara and an unidentified man. Also of interest to the police was a business card wedged in Tara's front door, belonging to a police officer in a nearby town. Allegedly, the man visited Tara's home often and had tried visiting her that Sunday and left her dozens of messages after not answering the door. This man was one of several who quickly became a person of interest in Tara's disappearance. Another was her ex-boyfriend of 6 years, who had broken up with her only weeks before her disappearance. There is also a former student of Tara's who had been arrested for harassing her in the past. All 3 men maintained their innocence in her disappearance, but none of them had a complete alibi for the time period in which she went missing. While Tara's story was widely covered in both local and national media, her case slowly started to become cold, until a new informant came forward in 2017. A woman named Brooke Sheridan went to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and told officers that her boyfriend, Bo Dukes, had confided in her that he had helped his friend Ryan Duke cover up the murder of Tara Grinstead. Before this tip, neither man had been on the investigators' radar. I should note here that despite the similarity in their last names, Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke are not related. The 2 men had been students at the high school where Tara was employed, but had graduated about 3 years prior to her disappearance. Shortly before being arrested by Georgia police, Ryan Duke confessed that on the night of Saturday the 22nd, he had broken into Tara's home while high on drugs and had tried stealing from her purse. Tara woke in the midst of this, at which point Ryan Dukes said that he murdered her, and then called his friend Bo Dukes to help hide her body. When police tested Ryan Dukes' DNA against the DNA found on the latex glove, they found that it was a match. Bo Dukes then said that he helped Ryan Duke transport Tara Grinstead's body to his uncle's pecan farm in Ben Hill County, Georgia, where they disposed of her remains. In 2019, Bo Dukes was found guilty of concealing Tara's death and hindering the arrest of Ryan Duke, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In Ryan Duke's trial, he claimed that Bo Dukes had actually been the one to murder Tara, and said that he had only confessed because he was scared of his friend. In 2022, Ryan was found not guilty of murder, aggravated assault, or burglary. Instead, he was found guilty of concealing a death and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. "31-year-old housewife and mother of two Joan Risch vanished from her home in Lincoln, Massachusetts on October 24, 1961. That morning, Joan's husband Martin Risch left for New York City on an overnight business trip. Soon after he left, Joan woke her children, 4-year-old Lillian and 2-year-old David, and made them breakfast. She had a dentist appointment that day in the neighboring town of Bedford, so she took her son over to her neighbor Mrs. Barker's house and brought her daughter with her for the errand. After the appointment, the pair went to a nearby department store before driving home and picking David back up. At some point after arriving back home, Joan put David down for a nap. At about 2 p.m., she brought Lillian back over to Mrs. Barker's house to play outside with her son Douglas, but left the kids in the yard without speaking to Mrs. Barker. She told the children that she would be back, and then walked across the street and went into her home alone. About 15 minutes later, Mrs. Barker briefly saw Joan standing next to her car in the driveway, now wearing a trench coat, and carrying something red with outstretched arms. This would be the last known sighting of Joan Risch. Sometime between 3:40 and 4 p.m., Mrs. Barker walked Lillian back home and left without going into her house or speaking to Joan. But only a few minutes later, the 4-year-old would run back across the street to Mrs. Barker's home to tell her that her mother was gone and that the kitchen was covered in red paint. Mrs. Barker then walked back to Joan's home and found a trail of blood leading into the house. She quickly called the police, who arrived at the scene within 5 minutes. When they went into the home, they found her son David upstairs in his crib, safe but crying. Besides the blood, which matched Joan's type, investigators found that the kitchen phone had been ripped from the wall and thrown in the trash can, which was now in the center of the room. Police also found an overturned table and a trail of blood starting in the baby's room, which led through the kitchen and then outside. There was also blood found in much of the rest of the house, and it was difficult for investigators to determine exactly where the bleeding had begun. There were also bloody fingerprints found on the walls of the kitchen, but we have no way of knowing if they belonged to Joan. While some believe there was a struggle inside the house, this seemed improbable to many, as there were no bloody footprints found inside, and the patterns of blood seemed to indicate someone staggering around from an injury. We should also note that in total, there was only half a pint of blood found scattered around the house, which indicated a non-life-threatening injury. Still, there was immense concern for Joan, and tips quickly began to roll into police. Between 3:15 and 4:30, there were 2 reported sightings of a woman with blood on her legs walking north on Route 128. She was said to be hunched over as though she was cold and was holding something at her stomach, but as far as I know, these sightings were never confirmed to be of Joan. There were many theories of what happened to the 31-year-old, and I would really need to make a separate video to adequately address all of them. But for now, I should mention a young girl that was a neighbor of the Risches, who reported that she saw an unfamiliar 2-tone car parked in Joan's driveway around 3:15, about an hour after she was seen holding something red outside of her house. This driver has still not been identified, and theories range as to why they were at Joan's house. Some believe that the driver was the one to attack or possibly kill Joan, while others believe that this person may have helped Joan orchestrate her own disappearance. About this latter theory, many have speculated that Joan was unhappy and may have wanted to escape her life as a stay-at-home mother. But to give you a better idea of who Joan was as a person, I should give you some background on her early years. In 1940, when Joan was only 8 years old, she was orphaned when both of her parents died in a house fire. It appears that Joan was staying out of town with relatives when this took place. The fire was seen as suspicious by authorities for several reasons, the first of which involved the location of her parents' remains. Joan's father was found on the living room floor, holding a telephone in his hand, while Joan's mother was found nearby in a chair. Both had apparently died from smoke inhalation. The second reason the fire was seen as suspicious involved the family's German Shepherd. The dog was fiercely protective of their home and was known to loudly bark at anyone who came near. However, on that night, it appears that no one recalled hearing the dog bark at all. When firemen arrived and began searching the scorched house, they found the dog's body wrapped in a blanket in the basement, as though somebody had placed it there before the fire even began. Despite these odd circumstances, it doesn't appear that police believed foul play was involved. After this, Joan's aunt and uncle became her legal guardians. Despite her troubled upbringing, Joan Risch graduated high school and enrolled at Wilson College to earn a degree in English literature. After her graduation in 1952, she would spend the next 5 years working for a publishing company in New York City, where she was described as an industrious and bright employee. In 1955, she married Martin Risch, and only 2 years later, she was pregnant with her first child. After giving birth, Joan decided to quit her job and become a stay-at-home mother, and by all accounts, Joan loved watching her children grow up. As you could have guessed, Joan was an avid reader and was known to frequent her local library. During the summer before her disappearance, Joan checked out 25 books from the library, most of which concerned staged disappearances and true crime. Much of the attention Joan's story has received is because of this fact, as many believe she may have been inspired by these books to stage her disappearance and escape her life. Now, I've saved this for the end of the video, because I'm not sure if this will be as interesting to you all as it was to me, but after some digging, I was able to find the list of books Joan checked out in the months leading up to her disappearance, and I'd like to give you a brief rundown on some of their plots. I should make it clear that Joan's interest in true crime is in no way proof of a contrived disappearance, but the Boston Globe accurately characterized these books as not the ordinary whodunit sort of mysteries, but rather a carefully culled selection of plots of the vanishing into thin air type. I'll leave it to you to decide if these books could have spurred Joan Risch to stage her own disappearance. If the cover of a certain book doesn't pop up on the screen, it means that I couldn't find the original book or author, and in these cases, I'll just borrow from the Boston Globe's plot descriptions. If you're up to the challenge, I invite you to track down any of the books I'm unable to find. If you're able to find the author of a certain book, please let me know down in the comments. The first book is called The Legacy, checked out from our local library on April 20th, 1961. It's apparently about a young boy who runs away from a military academy and hides in the woods. The next day, Joan checked out The Hollow, about a woman who kills her husband and schemes to turn suspicion away from herself. On April 29th, she checked out The Hunt for Richard Thorpe, a book about a schoolboy who orchestrates his own disappearance. Oddly enough, a book he had been reading turns out to be a clue of his whereabouts. That same day, she picked up an unnamed biography about Mary Queen of Scots. On May 11th, she checked out Into Thin Air, about an actress who vanishes and leaves behind a towel and bloodstains as clues. On June 10th, she checked out Rabbit Run, about a man trapped in a loveless marriage and a boring sales job, who attempts to run away from his life. On June 26th, she checked out The Death of the Heart, about an orphan girl who goes missing. On July 6th, she picked up Mostly Murder, a case book on murders and disappearances. On August 2nd, she checked out The Screaming Rabbit, a mystery novel about a man who goes missing. On September 16th, she checked out The 27th Wife, the biography of Anna Eliza Webb, one of the 55 wives of polygamist Brigham Young. She was married to the 67-year-old when she was only 24, and after 4 years of marriage, Webb filed for divorce from Young. The book details the horrors she faced in her marriage to Young, and the circumstances that ultimately prompted her to leave him. On October 2nd, she picked up Incense to Idols, a novel about a woman who flees Paris for New Zealand. The last book to be checked out by Joan Risch before her disappearance was Immortal Queen, another novel about Mary Queen of Scots. The book was found sitting open on a table when investigators first entered Joan's house. It has been nearly 62 years since Joan Risch vanished from her home, and no trace of her has been found. Investigators and internet sleuths are divided on whether Joan was a victim of foul play or not, as well as if she had a hand in her own disappearance. As of 2023, her case remains unsolved. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I really can't say how much I appreciate all of your support, but it truly means the world to me. I'm planning on getting the rest of these parts out as quickly as I can between normal uploads, so if you have any stories you would like me to cover in the near future, please let me know down in the comments. I would also love to hear your thoughts on these cases, as well as if you have any theories regarding a specific story. And again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a blessed day, and as always, stay safe.